Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are going to be testing out the new HUDA Beauty Blush Filter Palettes. Now HUDA just released 3 of these, so there is Roseberry, Toasty Peach, and she did also release a baby pink. I chose not to grab that one just because I just know I'm not necessarily as drawn to those types of blush tones. But we do have Roseberry and Toasty Peach to try out today. These are currently available at Sephora. These are retailing for $43 US or 59 Canadian. These have a 24-month shelf life and are made in Italy. Here is what the inner packaging looks like, and here is what the inside looks like. This is the Roseberry, and then we have Toasty Peach. Now they do look the exact same on the outside, but you do also get the legend for the shades on the back, so that is an easy way to tell which palette you're grabbing if you grab more than one. Now these palettes are described as limited edition blush palettes with 3 ultra pigmented matte powder blushes and a highlighter. And you can wear them alone or you can swirl them all together. So I think what we're going to do today is I'll show you some swatches, and then we will do some cheek swatches with these palettes. I think what I'll do is I'll try on each of the 4 shades individually, and then I'll also show you what they look like with the blush lighter on top. So first, let's hop into the swatches. So starting with the Toasty Peach swatches, we have the blush lighter in Peach Fizz. Then we have Baby Coral, Spice Tangerine, and Sunset Lychee. So I do think this one is very pretty. This is probably going to be the one that is most geared toward my skin tone. So getting into the Berry palette, we have the highlighter in Berry Fizz, Pink Velvet, Strawberry Cream, and Bronze Berry. Now this rosy palette is supposed to be based around the Strawberry Cream liquid blush. I actually really like this one. I do love the liquid blush filters. They are incredibly pigmented, but they're also very easy to blend. So I actually do love this formula quite a bit. But let me zoom you in and then we can try these on and I'll show you some comparisons. All right, so I think I'm gonna start with the rosy palette because I wanna land on the peachy one for the rest of the day. I'm gonna start with the highlighter. I do wanna show you what this looks like if you were to just wear that highlight all over the cheeks. I know that's not going to be something I'm going to do, but you might certainly want to try it, or you might want to use it as a blush topper. So I do want to show you what it looks like. This is a very, very pigmented shade. This will not work for me as just a general highlight. This is a rosy tone and it has a bit of a bronzy shift to it. So this is the shade Berry Fizz. You could definitely use this as an all-over blush if you wanted to. It is very shiny. It does have a bit of glitter to it. It's not the smoothest highlight, but it is quite creamy when you swatch it. So it's not overly dry and chunky by any means, but there are definite glitters in this formula. So that is Berry Fizz. All right, going into the other side with Pink Velvet. I see myself reaching for this shade a lot. I think this is beautiful. She did say these are super pigmented blushes, and I do kind of expect that from HUDA. This one is really nice. It's not aggressively pigmented. Like I'm able to build it up and get kind of the pigmentation that I want, but I can also go very, very light. I was a little bit worried that this particular palette wouldn't work for my skin tone, but this shade definitely does. Okay, so that is Pink Velvet. I think that's really pretty. It definitely is very matte. I think she described these blushes as being very blurring. I know the liquid formula is quite blurring. I don't find this particular shade to be crazy blurring. To be honest, I would say my YSL blushes and even the Tower 28 blushes are a little bit more blurring, but I still think it's a really, really pretty matte blush formula, and I really, really like this shade. I can see myself using this shade a lot. So there we have Berry Fizz and Pink Velvet. Now let's go back into Berry Fizz and I'll show you what it looks like on top of Pink Velvet. So just kind of using it as a blush topper. That's actually kind of nice. Definitely not going to be a regular highlight for me, but it does actually look quite pretty on top of that shade. I think it just gives it a little bit of extra life while letting the matte blush kind of stand as the base. That's really pretty. So Berry Fizz and then Pink Velvet topped with Berry Fizz. That's really pretty. All right, let me take these off and we can get into the next two shades. All right, one thing I do want to mention is I feel like the highlighter gives me a lot of kick up in the pan. I felt like every time I dipped into it, the glitters were kind of scattering around. So just keep that in mind. But let's get into Strawberry Cream. Now, like I mentioned, I love this shade in the liquid formula. I think it's so nice. I am just picking that up evenly, and I am going to tap a little bit off on my hand just because I do suspect this is going to be very pigmented. That's really, really pretty. Oh, I love that shade. I love that shade. I typically wouldn't build it that much, but as I suspected, it was very, very pigmented, but it is so, so pretty. Again, I don't think these are as blurring as the Tower 28 or the YSL, but they are still really, really pretty blushes. Okay, I'm just gonna flip to the other side of that same brush, and I'm gonna go into Bronze Berry. I do suspect this is one that's going to be a little too deep for my skin tone, but maybe if I go in with a really light hand, I'm gonna tap that off on my hand again. So just going in on this side with Bronze Berry. Yeah, this shade is definitely on the deeper side, but I could make it work, I think. Okay, so there we have Strawberry Cream and Bronze Berry. So of course I will have to go in with a much lighter hand if I want to wear these shades. But again, I do want you to see the shades on camera. So I am now going to go in to the Berry Fizz shade and top these blushes with that so you can see. So going in with Berry Fizz over top of Strawberry Cream. I'm just kind of swirling that everywhere so it'll just be kind of like a topper. And that's really pretty as a topper for the Strawberry Cream shade. I feel like when I swirled my brush, I sort of lost a lot of the glitters, but I do think it looks really nice that way as well. Just kind of gave more of a sheen. It definitely deepened the shade, but it really gave us more of a sheen. That's pretty. Okay, so going back into Berry Fizz and putting that on top of Bronze Berry. So of course that is also giving quite a sheen to Bronze Berry as well. So Strawberry Cream and Berry Fizz and Bronze Berry and Berry Fizz. So it definitely gives these shades much more of an intense sheen, but it's nothing too crazy. It does seem to pair very well with these shades. For my skin tone, I would use them as a blush topper, but in all honesty, I don't know that I'm going to get a lot of use out of this particular shade. It's just a little too glittery and a little too intense for my liking. I do really like all of these blush shades, in particular Pink Velvet, gorgeous, and Strawberry Cream I also love. I do like this palette, I just don't see myself reaching into the blush lighter too much. I think Bronze Berry might be really nice if I go in with a much lighter hand, but so far Pink Velvet and Strawberry Cream are the favorites from this one. But let me take these off and we can get into the Toasty Peach. All right, let's get into this Toasty Peach quad. I'm really excited for this one. I mean, no surprise, this is the color story I'm the most excited about, but I did just clean off my brushes and I want to go into Peach Fizz to start. This one actually might work for me as a highlight, but I do want to show you what it looks like all over the cheek. Yeah, this one actually could be a highlight on me because look how light and peachy it is. That's barely showing up as a blush on the cheeks. Yeah, that's barely showing up. So this could definitely act as an all-over highlight for me. It does have kind of like an ethereal pink sort of shift to it. It's got like an ethereal pink, but also kind of a golden shift, which I think is really interesting. I do think this shade will end up being a really nice highlighter. Okay, so now going into Baby Coral, which I'm really excited about. I know I'm going to love this shade. This is really, really pretty and soft. That is such a pretty shade. Yes, I love that shade so much. I think that's so pretty. So over here we have Peach Fizz all on its own, and then we have Baby Coral, which is so, so pretty. Okay, let's go into Peach Fizz to add a bit of a highlight. Okay, so that is Baby Coral with Peach Fizz on top. I think that's really pretty. So Peach Fizz on its own, it does show up a little bit. It has like a bronzy kind of undertone with that sort of pink ethereal glitter. And then Baby Coral is just a gorgeous light peachy pink. And when you add Peach Fizz on top, it just gives you a really pretty shiny ethereal sort of shade. That's beautiful. Let me take these off and we can get into the next two shades. All right, so let's get into these bottom two shades. So we're going to start with Spice Tangerine. This is really, really lovely also. These are looking a little deeper, so I am just going to sort of tap it into my hand a bit and then apply to the cheeks. This is pretty too, though. I do think this will be a pretty summer palette when I want those blushes that are gonna meld into my bronzer really well, give me that sort of sun-kissed look. This one is almost leaning a bit orange, but that's okay. So that is Spiced Tangerine. I do think that's pretty. What I noticed about the other palette too is the top blush shade, of course, works very well in my skin tone, and then the bottom two are very deep and intensely pigmented, like you can see. So just keep that in mind. I think anybody will be able to use these palettes. Going into Sunset Lychee. Again, just picking that up and trying to tap some of that off in my hand. These are very, very pigmented. This is a pretty shade too. And you can, of course, just mix all the shades together if you want to get your own custom shade. That is always an option. Sunset Lychee is very pretty. So we have Spiced Tangerine and Sunset Lychee. Very, very pretty blushes. I really like both of these shades. I do think I would lean a little bit more towards Sunset Lychee, but I can see Spiced Tangerine being a really pretty summer shade. I would, of course, go with a lighter hand, but just so you know. All right, so now we have the two shades on their own. Let's pair them with the highlighter. Okay, so going over Spiced Tangerine with Peach Fizz, just adding it to the high points initially. So it definitely gives a much more pinky shift to that orangey tone blush, which I don't mind. I think it's pretty. I do think it's not quite right for me as just a cheekbone sort of highlight, so I am going to go in and add it all over. That's actually really pretty all over. So that is Spiced Tangerine with Peach Fizz. Very pretty. Okay, let's go in with that highlighter on top of Sunset Lychee. So just hitting the high points first. And this does look really nice over Sunset Lychee as just a regular highlight. I do still think it might be a little bit too deep as just a highlighter, but let's pair it all over. That's quite pretty. It gives a really, really pretty kind of ethereal looking blush moment. That's quite pretty. So we have Spiced Tangerine and Peach Fizz and Sunset Lychee and Peach Fizz. Okay, let me pop off camera. I'm going to even these up and then I'll come back, show you some comparisons, and get into my final thoughts. All right, so here is the finished final look. I decided to even things out with Sunset Lychee on both cheeks, topped with that Peach Fizz highlight. I thought it was really pretty. I do think the Toasty Peach quad is my favorite between the two I tried today, but I do think both palettes have some gorgeous, gorgeous shades. I think Toasty Peach is, of course, a little bit more geared toward my specific skin tone, but I can definitely make both of these work. Now let's get into some comparisons, because there have been a lot of face palettes lately, and I have a lot of face palettes in general. So this is of course an all blush quad with this sort of highlight or blush light, as she calls them. I did compare this to the YSL Luxury Couture Clutch because I did try this very, very recently, and I've had conflicting thoughts on it going back and forth. The YSL blush formula is easily my favorite blush formula of all time, so it's hard for me to compare in terms of that. But the highlighters in here really aren't my favorite, especially this sort of pinky one that is that pink ethereal, much like Peach Fizz. The thing is, and I will pop up the comparison shots, you can see that the highlighter in the Huda palette has more of a base to it. It's more of like a peachy, bronzy sort of base, whereas the YSL doesn't really have a base. So the YSL kind of ends up being a highlighter, but that shade in particular is really just more of a glitter, whereas this one can be multifaceted. It can have its own base to it. It can go on the high points. It can act as a topper, and I think it does a better job because even though this is very shiny and does have glitters, I do think the glitters in here are a little bit more fine and a little bit more refined. There's just something about the YSL that just doesn't look right to me. I do still recommend the YSL blushes. I like the formula in this Huda palette a lot. I do think the YSL blushes are a little bit more blurring, but these are actually really nice too. There's nothing wrong with these whatsoever. I think they're beautiful. Now in terms of value and price point, the YSL is $85 US, the Huda is $43, and I can actually see myself getting use out of all 4 shades in here. I would reach into the highlighter the least, but I can definitely see myself getting use out of all 4 shades, which is more than I can say for the YSL. So I do like the YSL blush formula more, but this is half the price and I will use all of these shades. So just something to keep in mind, but the shade comparisons are relatively similar. I did also want to compare to the NARS Holiday palette that came out this year. And the NARS Holiday palette is kind of interesting. This one I can get a bronzer and a highlight. I know this is supposed to be a blush, but it works for me as a bronzer. The blush shades actually got pretty similar, and in terms of this blush here, it really is more of like a lavender lilac kind of highlight. It's very glittery. Popping them up side by side, the Huda palette is definitely much more pigmented. Of course, the NARS gives us more of that baby pink blush, and I didn't get that quad from Huda, but the shade similarities are definitely there. So if you already have the NARS, you might be able to create some similar looks that you can do with the Huda palette, but the Huda is definitely more pigmented. I do really like the way these sort of sit on the cheeks, and I prefer the matte options as to some of the more glowier options in the NARS. I think they're both great formulas. The Huda is of course more pigmented though. I did also want to compare this to last year's holiday palette from NARS. This is the Pure Luxury 24 Karat Gold palette, and this one of course has a bronzer and a highlight, but it has some very, very glowy options in here as well. So I felt like I was going to be able to get some similar face shades, and putting them up side by side, I was definitely able to get some very similar blush shades. The NARS of course gives a lot more shine and shimmer, given that we do have these glowier blushes, and I feel like this NARS palette had quite a bit more pigment to it than the pressed powders that are in this year's. Last year's NARS palette was that baked gelée formula, so it did have just a little bit more punch in terms of pigment. I like both quite a bit. I think if you already have last year's NARS palette, you could probably skip this if you wanted to. I do prefer the highlight from the NARS palette, but I do think the shades from the Huda palette are gorgeous as well. And before I fully turn to the Roseberry palette, I'll just show you swatches of the two palettes side by side. So you can see the Roseberry palette is of course much more rosy, more berry, more intense, and just overall darker shades. I can make it work for me, but it is going to be a little bit deeper and more pigmented. Now turning to the comparisons with the Roseberry palette, I did compare this to the YSL quad, and like I mentioned earlier, I do favor the YSL blush formula. There's just something about that formula that is magic to me. I do prefer the matte formulas. They do have some satins. Those are beautiful as well, but the matte formula is, I think, where the magic happens. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't love the highlights in here. That being said, I don't really like the blush lighter in the Roseberry palette. It's just a little too intense. But I do love the matte shades. Putting them up side by side, I wasn't able to match that berry shade from the YSL palette, and of course that deepest blush in the Roseberry palette I wasn't really able to match either, but the YSL does kind of work a little bit better for me in terms of the shades, aside from those highlighters that I'm not going to use. But again, I really do love these three matte blushes in the Huda. And because the Roseberry palette is quite a bit deeper, I wanted to pull out the NARS All That Glitters face palette. This was from 2 holidays ago. This is one where they were just doing one palette for everybody. So there's a mix of lighter and deeper shades in the palette, and I was kind of thinking of this one initially for this middle shade right here. This is the shade Vertigo, and it reminded me a lot of Berry Fizz. So popping up the swatches, they are pretty similar shades, and I did not like the shade Vertigo from the NARS palette when I tried that on either. The other shades I really wasn't able to get very close. So for me, the Roseberry palette really ends up being much more unique to my collection. I already have a lot of Toasty Peach blushes because I do love peach tones. I do love rose tones too. I just don't have a lot of blushes that are as deep as some of these. I think this is very, very pretty though, and aside from the highlighter, I can see myself reaching into these tones. This one, maybe not so much. The Bronzeberry, it might be a little too much for me. But Strawberry Cream I think is beautiful. I knew I was going to love that shade because I love it in the liquid. And Pink Velvet is absolutely gorgeous. And I really do love rosy tone blushes, so I can see myself getting quite a bit of use out of this palette. I do think I like the Peachy palette better, just because I can easily use all of these shades. They're all beautiful, and I will get some use out of the blush lighter as well. In terms of both of these, they're both gorgeous. I'm glad I have both of them. But I do favor the peachy one for sure, just for my particular skin tone. So I really, really like the matte blush formulas. I really like the matte blush shades. They're very pigmented. They're very blendable. They look lovely on the cheeks. I think you'll really be able to sheer them out or build them up as much as you want. So I do think they are really nice. And you can, of course, mix all of the shades together to customize your options. If you're interested in these, I would honestly just go with the one that's going to suit your skin tone the best. I like the blushes much more than the highlights, and I probably would have rather had just another matte blush in the palettes rather than those. But otherwise, the blushes themselves are great quality, and I like the packaging, and I like the price point quite a bit more than some of these other face palettes that I have. So let me know all of your thoughts down below. Are you picking these up? Are you skipping them? Are you excited that they launched right before the sale? Let me know that too. I love hearing from you guys so, so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.